So as you may know, the official Splatoon 3 art book released not too long ago, and with it we've gotten a bunch of interesting new information about how the game was developed. Now, one of the most interesting things that I discovered within the book is the fact they've actually shared all of the alternative artwork for the game. We're all familiar with the cover of Splatoon 3, it's become pretty iconic now as all of the game covers have, but it could have looked pretty different at some points. Now, whilst the core idea has always kind of remained the same, certain changes would have made for very interesting different artworks. So let's take a look through all of the different artworks that could have been featured on Splatoon 3's cover. I'm going to start out with the ones that weren't fleshed out as much. We have this one, which, yes, definitely keeps the core theme. It shows a scorched gorge in the background, which is to be expected at this point. And like I said, this one was just drawn, it didn't get to the stages of 3D modeling it seems like, but it still keeps the rough concept of what we got in the final game. One thing you'll notice about this box art though is it just features one character, which is pretty uncharacteristic, shall I say, no pun intended, of the Splatoon artwork. Although this is a pretty dramatic cover, I don't think it would have been nearly as interesting as some of these others or what we got in the end, so I'm glad they decided to change it. I actually might rate these as well, and you know what, I'm going to give this one a 4 out of 10. It isn't that fleshed out, so maybe it isn't a very fair rating, but I'm not a huge fan of the fact it's just one character, although I do like that it is quite dynamic. So for the next one, once again, this is more of a rough sketch, but it shows you some of the characters that we did expect to see in the final version. So this time around, it's really interesting because the logo has this giant sort of yellow swash going through it, I guess to emphasize the whole ink theme of the game, although it does take up a lot of space, which personally I don't think looks too good. It looks like Scorched Gorge once again, but this time the angle is slightly different and they're more kind of on the ground fighting each other. So we do have the fighting concept. It also shows another character in the background spawning in, so it shows even at this point that was still a feature in the game, which was slightly changed from the past. I definitely like this one. It has 3 characters on it, which makes a lot of sense for Splatoon 3. I like the setting that it's in, and you could see that if this was slightly more fleshed out, it would look even better. So you know what, I'm going to give this one a 6 out of 10. I think it's pretty good. I like the poses, I like that we're kind of seeing it from the perspective of the character in a way. So yes, it's definitely pretty cool in my opinion. Here are some other ones. This one is really cool. Now, it does use some elements from the other cover that we saw, some of the characters in the background. And once again, you do generally have that swash. Once again, I really like the action of this cover. I think it's pretty cool. And it's pretty similar to what we ended up getting in the final version. It's really, really close, honestly. It's just a little bit different slightly. This is more of a rougher version. You can definitely tell from this version they were getting pretty close to what they wanted for the final cover of the game, which I think is pretty darn cool. I think I would have to rate this one probably a 6 or a 7 out of 10. It's not too different than what we got, but I still like it. So here is a very different one. As you can see, right at the bottom there are all of these effects which really do take up a lot of space on the screen, although it isn't too different than what we got in the final version. There's still quite a lot going on at the bottom of the screen, so that idea is still kept in mind. And it's just one character once again, you've got nothing else really going on except the one character. But I really do like how dynamic this pose is. I like that the character looks more kind of angry than playful. I think that's kind of a cool touch. But we're really missing all of the other different characters, which I think is a shame, especially since it is Splatoon 3. But one thing that is interesting is you do have the little inkling which is flying up in the background like we have on the final cover. So I guess it really does show they use elements from all of the different covers to make the final artwork, which I think is pretty neat to see. I'd probably have to give this one a 5 or a 6 once again. I don't really like the fact that it's just one character, but again, I do like how dynamic it is. I know I've only been giving low ratings so far, but for the next 2, you're going to see those ratings go up. So here we have my absolute favorite of the alternate box arts. This one is so cool in my opinion, and it's pretty close to what we got in the final version, except the poses of the characters are really different. Now, I like this one a lot more than what we finally got, to be honest with you. I think it's really cool showing off the action of the game. I really like the poses, and of course it keeps all of the elements that we know and love from the final box art of Splatoon 3. So I think it's definitely a good cover. I think I would have to rate this one probably a 7 or an 8. It is really cool. Now finally, we have another one that is similar to some of the other sketches we saw. It is once again just one character in Scorched Gorge, and we do have the little inkling at the top. Now this one looks like it was pretty darn close to the final version, just like the one in the bottom corner that I just showed was. So that definitely indicates that this was very close to being the final contender for the box art of the game. It's almost completely there. I really like the style of this one. It's not actually 3D modeled, which is something I wish they would do for the cover art of these games. Sadly, Nintendo doesn't seem to do that as much these days with their games. They tend to use the 3D models, but it would have been cool if it was in this sort of drawn style that we see here. I'm assuming that if this had been made into the cover though, it still would have been turned into a 3D model. Either way, I really like this one. It's definitely, I would say it's my favorite, honestly, so I'm going to give this one an 8. I think it's really cool, an 8 or a 9. Believe it or not though, the interesting early details do not end there, as they actually give us another preview at some very iconic artwork when it was in its very early stages. Here we can see some of the very rough sketches for some of the key artwork for the game that now we all know and love. So by now, we all know these iconic pieces of artwork for the game. Some have changed slightly, but overall it is what we got in the final version. And it's still interesting to me how much Scorched Gorge wanted to be featured as the main map of the game when advertising it. Of course, it is a new map, so it makes a lot of sense, but they really wanted to show this map off in particular, as we can see with all of these different pieces of artwork. In this different page, we also have a look at a very early version of the icon for the game that we have on our Nintendo Switch, which actually depicts the free characters, of course, to go in line with it being Splatoon 3. We can see some different versions of this originally too. It seems like they always had the idea to have the ink splattering between them, but in some versions it was actually just 2 characters rather than the 3, which I don't think makes as much sense. Now, this is just a conspiracy theory on my part, but maybe it does indicate that at some point it was not going to be called Splatoon 3, and it could have actually had a different name entirely. Now, that's just complete speculation, that's probably not the case at all, but it certainly would be interesting if that was the reason, and then later on it became Splatoon 3, so they really decided to lean into the fact that it is the number 3, using 3 characters and such for the icon. It's so cool to see these early versions of some really iconic artwork, and you can see just how much attention to detail they put into them. Nintendo doesn't often do this for a lot of their games, so I'm really happy that with Splatoon they give us such an insight into how they've developed and worked on these games that we love so much. These have all been really cool to see, honestly. It's interesting to see how they developed Splatoon 3, what different ideas they had at the start, and how eventually it sort of changed over time, but sort of most of the core ideas stayed intact. Let me know what your favourite is down in the comments section below, I'd love to hear. If you made it to the end, be sure to comment Splat Gang down below so I know you did. If you enjoyed, be sure to leave a like, and if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe and turn on channel notifications for more. If you want to support my content, consider becoming a member by clicking the join button or the link in the description. You can get some exclusive perks for doing so, like emojis, a badge by your name, and you even get featured at the end of my videos.